Hey guys, how's it going? This is the Bald Metal Nerd coming at you with another video. Undoubtedly, you already know what this video is about since you've already read the flippin' title of the thing. I'm going to be talking about vinyl and CD again for the third and possibly final time, and I'm going to explain why I'm talking about this yet again and why this is going to be the third time for a long time, possibly ever, that I address this issue. But if you want to just immediately leap to the comments and type something mean because this is too long, didn't watch, basically my conclusions are going to be very similar to what they were before. And my conclusion is sound quality is not, I repeat, not a reason to collect vinyl over CDs or any other digital formats. So with that out of the way, feel free to jump down there, tell me how I'm deaf, or my equipment's shitty, or I'm stupid, or I can't hear, or whatever, or how I'm wrong, or anything. Knock yourselves out. Anyway, that getting out of the way, let's go ahead and I'm going to talk about now the why I decided to record this before. When I recorded my initial video on this a couple of years ago, it was before I had a turntable at all. I just had heard vinyl at friends and family's houses, and I wasn't particularly blown away by it. I was like, it sounds good, but it's not like this whole new level of sound. That was basically my initial impression of vinyl, listening to it outside of my own system, right? And then a couple of years ago, I got a turntable, right? And I made a second video on this topic. But at the time, I only had like 3 records, right? Which is not a huge pool of music to listen to. It's pretty small sampling size overall, and I was kind of, going out on for some conclusions on it. And I was like, you know what, that's pretty small, but I was really comfortable with my conclusions, and I thought they were accurate. And well, I'm kind of still thinking that that my initial impressions were correct, because now here I am a couple years later, and my record collection is still pretty small. It's between 20 and 25 titles. I don't know the exact number, so it's still pretty damn small. And but to be fair, it has expanded quite a bit from where it was. I now have recordings that are very modern, some that are old, some that were originally all recorded on digital equipment, some that was all originally recorded on analog equipment. So I had and a variety of genres and styles and blah blah flippin' blah. So I felt I had enough of a variety of music on the 2 formats to where I could have a more complete picture of the differences between the two, and really be able to nail down what I thought about this question more thoroughly than what I could before. So that was the inspiration of why I made this video. As far as why this is likely to be the last time I will do this, I mean, I can't guarantee it, but I think I'm leaning very heavily towards this being the end. If the only way I'll make another video on this again is if my opinion changes significantly in the future, which I don't think that it will. That's the only way I'm going to do this, is if I become like a vinyl true believer, for a lack of a better term, and I just don't see that happening. Because my basic opinion hasn't changed regardless of my exposure to vinyl, and I don't think it's going to. So now that's out of the way, you might be asking yourself, well, how did you make this video? How did you compare all that? Well, maybe not, but I'm going to tell you anyway, right? Recently, I completed digitizing all of my vinyl records. So I basically recorded them into my laptop at 96,000 kilohertz, 24-bit bit depth, and there you go. So what I was initially doing, actually, I wasn't initially comparing them with the CD. I was comparing the needle drop to the actual record itself. And in some ways, I actually preferred, I mean, they mostly sounded pretty much identical, but in some ways, I actually preferred the needle drop to the actual record. Possibly that was due to the sound of my DAC versus my record player. I don't know. Who knows, right? So that was pretty much where I fell on that curve. And then I decided, okay, let's compare the, actual, the needle drop to the CD, because I was thinking to myself, well, if I like the needle drop better, that would be the best chance for vinyl to shine out and be better than CD, right? Might as well pick the source that I think sounds better. So and then I started to test. And if you're curious as to what equipment I have an Audio-Technica AT-LP120 turntable, and I have a 5-disc JVC CD changer from 2001 that I paid about 110 bucks for. You throw that into the inflation calculator, that equals about $155 today, and that is roughly what a decent quality 5-disc CD changer will run you today. So very comparable equipment to, like, say, a modern Onkyo 5-disc changer or whatever. So there you go. And as far as what I consider my equipment, I consider it to be decent, and it's certainly above crap tier. And I used my graphic equalizer on my CD, that I've hooked up to my CD player to equalize the volume with the playback of the vinyl rip. And I used my handy dandy dB meter to get the volume as close to each other as I could. So I started out listening to recordings that were all done on digital originally, because there's an old saying that if a recording was originally all done with digital equipment, you should only listen to it either on CD or through digital, right? There's no much point listening to it on vinyl. So I was like, okay, fine, we'll compare some digital recordings first. The first one I compared was Metallica's Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I compared the original pressing CD and the original pressing vinyl, because that's still a pretty new record. That's what I have of both of them. And forgive me, guys, if I look over it that way. It's just because I'm referring to my notes. On Hardwired, sometimes I had no preference. Sometimes I preferred the CD. But if I did prefer the CD sounded smoother, better soundstage, more detail, etc. It was a slight preference, but the vinyl still sounded excellent, right? Next up, we have the Black Album, which the CD, I thought, again, as far as which ones I had of the Metallica's Black Album, I had a first pressing CD and a recent vinyl reissue. On the Black Album, it was better everything. Clarity, soundstage, frequency response, all the CD, by the way. And frequency range, including deeper bass. It was a slight preference for the CD. Again, the vinyl still sounded absolutely fantastic. And then we're going to move on to... But, that would seem to track with the saying, if it's all digital, listen to it in digital, right? If it's analog, though, boy, vinyl's the way to go. I kind of disagree with that, because to me there's kind of a myth going around that that says digital can't capture all of the nuances of real-life analog sound because of the stair steps and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's technically how digital works, but it sure as hell isn't audible. It's, and if you output a digital, it's still, a wave. It's not stair steps, right? So, I don't know. I think that's BS, and I think digital is more than capable of capturing all of the nuances of analog sound, especially considering the fact that the needle drops did it so well, and that was clearly a digital recording. So that being said, we're going to talk about the analog recordings I listened to on vinyl and CD now. The first one was Master of Puppets. The CD version I had, it wasn't an original pressing. It was a CD version from the early 90s. I don't know exactly which one, but that's what the CD was of Master of Puppets that I had. And the vinyl version that I had was the blackened reissue that came out right before. It was not the recent remaster that they still did. It was still the original mastering, but it was the blackened, and it was a fairly recent reissue. And on that one, the CD sounded significantly better. The vinyl almost sounded like it was underwater by comparison. And I didn't chalk that up to vinyl being worse than CD in that case. I think it had more to do with the poor pressing of that record because it's known for being a bit dodgy, and well, it lives up to the name. It just did not sound very good. I think it was kind of a similar situation to where, let's say you get a vintage vinyl record from the 70s or 80s, and you get a 2015 digitally remastered, newer, better version that's brick wall limited, all the dynamic range sucked out of it. Of course, the vinyl is going to sound better. So I think it was just a bad pressing on that one. So there you go. Next up, I listened to Queen's Night at the Opera. And as far as what did I have, the vinyl is a recent reissue, but the CD is a vintage pressing from the 80s because it actually says made in West Germany. And if you're old like me and you remember the Cold War, you know that East and West Germany used to be a thing before the fall of the Soviet Union, like in 1990. So obviously this thing tracks from the 80s. And which one did I prefer? Well, I couldn't really pick a favorite. It was hard to do an exact volume match for some reason. I had real difficulty with that one. And I think my preference honestly shifted based on the volume. Just the slight, 20th of a decibel or whatever the hell it was I couldn't get. And in fact, they both sounded so great. Both the sources, the vinyl and the CD, sounded awesome that it called into question my preferences when, the vinyl wasn't significantly shittier. It called into question my preferences of the digital recordings because it sounded so good on vinyl. But it did not sound better than CD. I mean, if I would bump up the volume of the CD a little bit, suddenly I thought the CD sounded better, and vice versa. They were pretty much lockstep with each other as far as how good they sounded, right? There was no clear winner in that one. So I did a couple more recordings because I just noticed a very similar pattern moving forward after this. Michael Jackson's Thriller. The versions I listened to a 2011 special edition that had some additional tracks and all that, and a 2014 reissue of the album, and then a recent vinyl reissue of Thriller. And I maybe had a slight preference for the CDs, but it wasn't big. And again, it could have been down to the volume. Everything sounded absolutely great as far as that album goes. All three sounded fantastic. And following that up, I listened to Nine Inch Nails' Pretty Hate Machine. Again, my preference shifted due to the volume adjustments. Both sounded great. I had an original pressing CD and a recent vinyl reissue. And then my final analog recording I listened to was Megadeth's Rest in Peace. I had a moderate preference for the CD. Again, I think this is down to the pressing more than anything else. The CD, better all across the board, regardless of the volume adjustments. I had an original pressing CD and a vinyl reissue of the original mastering, not the 2004 butchered Dave Mustaine thing. So, the whole, you need to listen to analog recordings on records. I didn't see like this, for lack of a better term, magical quality to the sound listening to the vinyl over the CD. At best, it matched the CD. At vinyl's absolute best, it was only as good as CD. So what does this tell me? It tells me that there are a lot of myths, in my opinion, going around about vinyl playback. That it's somehow smoother, more natural, fuller, better sound. All that, I think, ultimately is BS. Really what it boils down to are the masterings, right? If you have the same mastering, because a lot of these records that I had were the same masterings as the CD. If it's the exact same mastering, generally, if I have to give adjectives of smoother, more realistic, better sound stage, all that, I'm going to have to give it to digital more often than analog. That's not to say vinyl can't sound better. It absolutely can if it has the better mastering. Like I said, loudness wars, blah, blah, blah. So it is absolutely possible for vinyl to sound better than CD. But as a, quote, general rule, it doesn't. It's simply the notion that vinyl is somehow inherently superior to digital in any way whatsoever when it comes to sound quality is a myth. Pure and simple. They can equal each other, but it's certainly not better. So where does this leave me with the whole, what are my conclusions? Well, vinyl sounds great. It's definitely high fidelity. But ultimately, the reason I collect vinyl isn't because I feel it's really better than CD. I collect it because it's different. There's no denying that it's different. You don't hear any background noise with digital, right? You don't hear the surface noise on the record or the pops or any of that stuff. That doesn't exist on CDs. Plus, there is a slightly different character to the sound with the vinyl. It's very minor. It does exist. I don't know how to describe it, but there is a very slight difference. You know, and some people absolutely love it. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a preference for vinyl. But to quantitatively say it's better, to me, that kind of requires some sort of proof. And there really isn't any. It's all subjective opinion. So with all that being said, you might be asking yourself, why in the hell do you collect vinyl in the first place? If it's not better sound quality-wise, what's the point? Well, personally, I collect vinyl because it's fun. It's nice to have big 12-inch art. It's nice to have the gatefold with the large print. It's nice to have the large physical object that a record is. I know it sounds counterintuitive, you know, but it's fun. It's fun having the somewhat different experience that vinyl provides, for lack of a better term. And that's the reason I buy some vinyl. I don't, again, it will never be my primary format, but it is a very, for lack of a better term, fun format because it is fun to get that slightly different experience. So, that pretty much wraps this up. As always, if you enjoyed this, thumbs up. If you hate me, thumbs down. Share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thanks so much for watching. I will catch you guys next time.